The world woke up to a shocking update as the escalating conflict in the Middle East reached a devastating new level. Reports now indicate that more than 1,000 people have been killed in Iran after days of intense military strikes carried out by the United States and Israel. According to human rights monitors and regional reports, the death toll has crossed the 1,000 mark, with some estimates placing it even higher as rescue teams continue pulling victims from the rubble. The situation began escalating rapidly when coordinated airstrikes targeted multiple strategic locations across Iran. Military installations, missile facilities, and infrastructure linked to Iran's security forces were among the primary targets. Israeli officials confirmed that their air force struck several command centers, missile production facilities, and logistics hubs in cities including Tehran and Isfahan. Thick smoke rose over neighborhoods as explosions echoed across the capital, leaving residents scrambling for safety and emergency crews racing to the scene. But as the attacks intensified, the human toll quickly began rising. Early reports suggested hundreds of casualties, yet within days, the numbers surged dramatically. Iran's health authorities reported hundreds dead and thousands injured, with hospitals overwhelmed by the influx of wounded civilians and soldiers. Many victims were caught in densely populated areas where military targets were located close to residential neighborhoods. One of the most heartbreaking incidents reportedly occurred in the southeastern city of Minab, where a strike hit near a girls' elementary school. According to human rights organizations monitoring the conflict, dozens of children were among those killed in that attack. The tragedy sent shockwaves across the region and sparked global outrage as images of damaged classrooms and grieving families began circulating online. As the bombing campaign expanded, the scale of destruction became clearer. Buildings collapsed in multiple districts of Tehran, rescue workers dug through concrete and twisted steel, and hospitals struggled to treat the wounded. The Iranian Red Crescent reported thousands of injuries, including children and elderly civilians. Emergency surgeries were being performed around the clock, while doctors warned that medical supplies could soon run short if the conflict continued at the same pace. The strikes were part of what U.S. officials described as a coordinated campaign designed to weaken Iran's military capabilities and strategic infrastructure. American and Israeli forces reportedly maintained continuous aerial operations, striking targets across the country every hour. According to defense officials, the objective was to dismantle missile networks, disrupt command systems, and reduce Iran's ability to project power across the region. However, Iran has not remained silent in the face of these attacks. The government in Tehran quickly launched retaliatory strikes using drones and ballistic missiles aimed at Israeli territory and locations hosting American military assets in the Middle East. Air raid sirens echoed in Israeli cities as defense systems scrambled to intercept incoming projectiles. In several cases, missiles broke through defenses and caused casualties and damage. Regional tensions escalated even further as the conflict spread beyond Iran's borders. Militias and allied groups across the Middle East began launching their own attacks against Israeli or American targets. Rocket fire was reported in Lebanon, and several Gulf countries heightened military readiness after intercepting missiles or drones entering their airspace. Governments across the region warned that the conflict could spiral into a wider war involving multiple nations. The economic impact of the fighting has also been severe. Global markets reacted immediately as oil prices surged amid fears that the conflict could disrupt key shipping lanes and energy supplies. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical choke points for global oil transport, became a focal point of concern. Analysts warned that any prolonged disruption in the region could send energy prices skyrocketing and trigger economic ripple effects around the world. Meanwhile, diplomatic reactions poured in from across the globe. Several countries called for an immediate ceasefire and urged all sides to return to negotiations before the situation spirals out of control. International organizations and humanitarian groups warned that the civilian toll could climb even higher if the bombing campaign continues. Human rights organizations also raised serious concerns about potential violations of international humanitarian law, especially after reports that civilian infrastructure and residential areas had been struck. Inside Iran, the mood has shifted dramatically. Streets once filled with daily life now show signs of war. Shattered windows, damaged buildings, and long lines outside hospitals. Families search for missing relatives while rescue crews continue their desperate efforts to locate survivors trapped beneath collapsed structures. Many residents have fled major cities, fearing that further strikes could occur at any moment. The Iranian government has condemned the attacks, accusing both Washington and Tel Aviv of launching what it calls an illegal and unjustified assault on its territory. Officials have vowed that Iran will continue defending itself and promised retaliation if the strikes do not stop. Military leaders warned that their response could expand beyond Israel to include American bases across the region if the campaign intensifies. At the same time, political leaders in the United States and Israel argue that the strikes were necessary to counter what they describe as Iran's growing military threat. They say Iran's missile program, nuclear ambitions, and support for armed groups in the region pose a direct danger to international security. By targeting key facilities and military infrastructure, they claim the operation aims to reduce that threat and prevent future attacks. But critics argue that the scale of the bombing risks triggering a much larger conflict that could engulf the entire Middle East. Analysts warn that once major powers begin exchanging direct strikes, it becomes increasingly difficult to contain escalation. Every retaliatory attack risks prompting an even stronger response, creating a dangerous cycle of violence that can spiral rapidly. Hospitals across several Iranian cities have been operating at maximum capacity, with doctors and nurses working non-stop to treat the injured. Medical volunteers have stepped forward to assist, but the scale of the crisis has stretched resources thin. Blood donation centers have reported massive demand as families line up to help the wounded. Meanwhile, millions of people across the Middle East are watching anxiously, fearing that the conflict could expand even further. Airlines have canceled flights across the region, embassies have issued travel warnings, and some governments have begun evacuating their citizens from areas close to the fighting. Military analysts say the next phase of the conflict could determine whether this remains a limited series of strikes or transforms into a full-scale regional war. Iran still possesses significant military capabilities, including missile forces and allied groups across the region that could be mobilized in response. If those forces become fully engaged, the conflict could spread far beyond the current battle lines. The global community now faces a tense and uncertain moment. Diplomats are working urgently behind the scenes to prevent further escalation, but so far, there are few signs that either side is ready to step back. Both Iran and its opponents appear determined to continue pursuing their strategic objectives, despite the rising human cost. For ordinary civilians caught in the middle, the consequences are already devastating. Homes have been destroyed, families torn apart, and entire communities plunged into grief and uncertainty. The images emerging from the conflict show scenes of destruction that many fear could worsen if the violence continues. As rescue workers keep digging through rubble and hospitals struggle to treat the wounded, the true scale of the tragedy is still unfolding. With more than 1,000 lives already lost and thousands injured, the conflict has become one of the most dangerous flashpoints in the world today. And as the world watches these events unfold, one question looms over everything. Will the violence stop before it triggers an even larger war? Or are we witnessing the beginning of a conflict that could reshape the entire Middle East?